Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC, investment advisor representative of Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to KPFT Houston. I'm Chris Hensley. The time is now 10 a.m. We've got a great show lined up for you today. We are here at the very last show of December of 2017. We're kicking off the new year starting on Tuesday. We will be in 2018. And so it is really a good time when we talk about finances, when we talk about budgeting, when we talk about consumer finance. It is a really good time to take a breather, take a moment to sit down, reflect on our financial goals, and kind of look at some of those things that might be unique to the end of the year, whether it's the end of the fiscal year for a business, whether it's the end of your year, when people typically sit down and make resolutions for New Year's. We are going to kind of do a deep dive into that. Specifically, we're going to talk about budgeting, and we have with us today, our guest is Mitchell Walker. He is the author of the PouchPlan Budget. And so what is the PouchPlan Budget? You will find out in just a moment when we bring him on. We'll do a deep dive into that and also additional questions around the holiday season and lots of different information when it comes to finances. So please stay tuned. Keep listening. He will be joining us very, very shortly. With that, I always take just the first few minutes of the show to tell you a little bit about what's going on here in the Houston and the Gulf Coast region when it comes to financial literacy. As you know, I am a member of the Houston Money Week leadership team, and so that is, now that we're actually making it into 2018, that is going to be taking place in April. You hear me talk about it each and every show because we are ramping up, we are building up until what used to be Houston Money Week would just take place 1 week in April. It takes up the entire month of April. It's Houston's response to National Financial Literacy Month, and it has grown, and this is our 10-year anniversary. And so there are many different for-profit businesses, non-profit businesses, local city, state government, schools, universities, high schools, involved with Houston Money Week. And as we get into actually getting into 2018, we're starting to build closer and closer to this event. There are going to be some events that actually take place prior to that. The Houston Hispanic Foundation is going to have a college planning event that takes place in February. I've done this for the last 3 years now. I think this will be either the third or fourth year. And we basically take over the George R. Brown Convention Center. Several thousands of teenagers are bussed in to the George Brown Convention Center, and we talk about college planning. We have career panels where people come in and talk about their profession. So we've had the FBI, we've had NASA, we've had engineers come in and answer questions from the teenagers about what they do, as well as college planning, how to finance college tuition for parents. Lots of really good information, and that's taking place in February. So that's really, in the scheme of things, not too far away. And then March, we'll have more and more information coming to you, and then everything will kick off there in April. To find out more about Houston Money Week, how you can become involved as a partner, or if you just like to attend the free financial literacy seminars, you can visit www.houstonmoneyweek.org. And with that, let's go ahead and get Mitchell on the line here. Mitchell, are you there?
I'm here, Chris. Good to visit with you.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Completely my pleasure.
Absolutely. So I always like to share a little bit about you with listeners so that they can get to know you. Now, Mitchell Walker's financial experience spans 25 years and covers working with public to being the CFO of a Berkshire Hathaway company. He has owned 5 businesses, served as the CFO of a community college, and as a county commissioner and city councilman. The Pouch Plan was developed based on his expertise, but more importantly, was put to the test and proven by Mitchell and his wife Suzanne over 20-plus years as they raised their blended family of 7. Mitchell, once again, thank you for joining us.
It's such an honor to be here and to share more with your listeners about the Pouch Plan and how it's changed my life and hopefully can affect theirs in a positive way as well.
Absolutely. So we'll dive right into that. Is there anything outside of that bio that you might be able to share with us so that we can know you just a little bit better?
Well, I took an early retirement from Berkshire Hathaway about 3 years ago, and with the intention of doing this. Personal finance has been my passion for years and years and years, but I was in that corporate world and then was in the political world and then was in the business world, and so I didn't really get a chance to jump out and do what I wanted to do until about 3 years ago. And even then, I went and helped the local community college in our area for a year that was struggling a bit. But I have been having the best time of my life the last 2 years, including writing the book and seeing people's lives change by adopting these very sensible and simple principles.
So that's fantastic. Well, then let's dive right into it there. Why did you write this book?
Well, I wrote the book because it was something that worked for my wife and I and produced dramatic results in our lives. And as we shared it with our friends and the people we went to church with over the last 20 years, I knew I had a system that would make a difference in people's financial futures. The challenge was to be able to take it from something I did one-on-one and in a small group and make it applicable to a much wider audience. And so that's why I wrote the book.
And, you know, most people are failing financially, or they might be failing financially. Why will the Pouch Plan work for them?
Well, what I've discovered, and I think what you can probably back up, is that most people don't fall off the financial planning wagon. They never get on. That first step on is really just a doable and usable budget. And that is so tough for 80% of our fellow Americans to start that process that they give up before they even get going. And, you know, you and I know the corporate world and finances, and we understand budgeting, and we understand why big companies and governments and entities use it, and they do it because it works. But it works because those entities are able to pour a lot of resources, time, expertise, skill into that process that the average individual and family simply don't possess.
And that, pulling your experience from the Berkshire Hathaway company for listeners, that's Warren Buffett's company, Berkshire Hathaway, and really bringing this to them, you've had some experience. Can you say that if you had to say there are 5 things that the wealthy do, can you share with us what they are so that we can join them?
Absolutely. The first thing to do is they have some sort of plan. A pastor friend of mine in Rockwall said this better than anybody I've ever heard phrase it before. If you don't have a plan for your money, rest assured a bunch of other people do. And their plans will trounce your no plan every time. If you don't have some sort of plan, you will lose in the game. Number one. Number two is that plan needs to be written down and regularly reviewed in order for it to become your habits. If it does not become your habits, your willpower will also be overrun by what's out there fighting against you. Number three is the wealthy look at assets different than most of us do. They consider assets things that produce for them, not things that consume for them. In other words, cars, clothes, most jewelry, even housing in a lot of instances are not considered assets by the wealthy. Number 4, they invest in themselves a lot more than the average person does, whether that's education-wise, business training, their own businesses, but they invest savings, they invest first in themselves a lot more than the other people do. And then number 5, I borrowed this from Mr. Buffett, and that is that when they do invest, they only invest in things they understand. And the sad thing is most people want to jump down to number 5 and invest in things they don't have a clue about, and it ends up bad for them.
Absolutely. So that's a lot of information there that are very good best practices when it comes to your finances. You talked about having a plan. You said if you don't have a plan, there's one out there for you, but somebody else has written it. And so it's not that there's not a plan, but you need to sit down and get your own plan there. And then you mentioned going back and reviewing it. So once you have something in place, this is a dynamic document or a dynamic plan as opposed to something that's static that just stays the same. You're going back and reviewing it, holding yourself accountable. You talked about
and feedback, Chris. Feedback is so important. Is it or is it not accomplishing what you wanted to accomplish? The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. If it's not moving you forward to where you want it to go and accomplish, if your money's not doing what you want it to do for you, change that plan.
Absolutely. Having the feedback and being able to see, being held accountable to those things that you said that you wanted to do. Huge. And then you also mentioned that the wealthy tend to look at assets differently than most people. They're looking for something that produces. You talked about investing in yourself, that the wealthy tend to invest in themselves more than most people. And then the last one, only invest in things that you understand. So taking the time to really get to know anything before you throw money at it. You never throw money at something without understanding it, for sure. Now, one of the things I'm gonna kind of sidestep here, because one of the things you talk about in the book is the idea of a 10% raise in 10 days. How do you get that? How does that work?
That's the average amount of hidden or laying around money that people find when they put a budget together. It's an amazing phenomenon. I have seen it literally hundreds of times, and it doesn't really make any difference what the income level is. If it's $20,000 a year or $250,000 a year. If they haven't been looking at what they're spending their money on, it's really easy to find 10% that you can redirect to where you want it.
So that's huge. When you think about 10% as a number, I mean, that could be extra tuition for college. That could be discretionary spending for gifts. If it's found money, it could be, or it could pay the things that you already that you need to pay off anyway to get you out of debt. But that could be huge for many people.
For 80% of our American, patriots out there, that's that first step on the wagon. You got to create that gap between what you spend and what you have coming in. And if you can increase that gap, then you can have your money start working for you rather than against you.
When in the book you talk about people being either financial wanderers, financial squanders, or financial ponderers. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means, and then how can you find out which one you are? Absolutely.
The question that I ask people is, tell me about your plan. And if I get that deer in the headlight look, I know that I've got me a squanderer there. They don't have a clue what's going on with their money. And, down here in Texas, I'm gonna say this because they're going to end up as financial roadkill.
Yep.
They're just going to get run over and be on the side of the road and never get to participate in where everybody else is going because they just squander it. They never even ask that question. And then you ask that question, they said, well, I'm trying to get to zero every month. I just don't want to spend more than I take in. Well, they're just wandering around. They're in a desert, and they're never going to get to the promised land because they're never going to hit the oasis of having a gap between their income and their expenses. And then that poor ponderer, you ask them about it, and they start telling you all this wonderful stuff, and then you ask, well, show me your bank account, and they have nothing because they've never had the ability to take that first step of just starting small. Just start with $20 a week, $5 a day. Just start. And they have never started. And all three of these end up in about the same situation, which is, the average, I'm 62 years old now, so I keep track of this figure. The average person in America who's 62 years old has about $17,000 stuck back for retirement. So they're okay for about 109 days. And then they got to have a plan B.
Very true. And so I would tell people, listen up, because here's somebody, you retired early, so you're living it. You're actually going through this now. And my experience working with retirees has been the same, that many of them don't have a plan A, much less a plan B. So this is super important what you're talking about here. Now let's talk about budgeting, or what you call the pouch plan. You have a different approach when it comes to budgeting. What is the pouch plan?
I do have a very different approach, and that's because I looked at what did not work for people. And as I mentioned earlier, most people don't have those skills necessary and the resources available to do a traditional accounting-wise budget, of tracking everything, posting things, keeping receipts. It wears them down. They don't understand numbers, and they fail. So what we ended up doing was a budget that requires no math, no accounting, no posting of receipts, and yet is always in balance and is always up to date. And it was by accident that we got there. So don't think I was a genius, but I got there because that was basically the kind of budget that my wife told me she had to have in order to run our household. And so we started with the old envelope system, where you write on each envelope the expense category, and then you put cash in the envelope. But wow, with a blended family of 5 kids, ages 5 through 17, we were just going 100 miles an hour in all different kinds of ways, and that thing was way too difficult to administrate. And plus, it's difficult to pay some bills with cash nowadays. It's always been difficult to pay some bills with cash, and you also just when you have 25 envelopes, you just got an awful lot of cash around, which we weren't comfortable with. So what we looked at doing was we looked at saying, what if we consider our bank account in a new and totally different way? And we said basically our bills go out like everybody's do, out of one of two, we call them piles. The first pile we labeled regular, because it was regular in amount and irregular in time each month. That's your rent or your mortgage. That's your car payment. That's going to be insurance, cable bill, cell phone, utilities, things such as that. And we said, what if we look at that bank account as though it's an envelope? And into that envelope, we deposit enough money, but only enough money to pay these regular expenses. And what we did, Chris, was we changed the way we looked at our bank account from a place where we parked our money while we were waiting to decide what to spend it on, to a place where every dollar was considered spent the second it was deposited into the bank account. And what amazingly happened was that took about 50 to 60% of our bills off the plate and put them on automatic. We didn't even have to worry about them anymore. Out of each paycheck, enough money was put into the bank account to pay those bills that came due until the next paycheck. Now, the other stack of bills that we had and expenses that we had, we called irregular. And we called them that because they varied in amount and time each month. That would be things like household expense, food items, groceries, gifts, entertainment, hair and nails, things such as that. And we said we are going to use a version of the old envelope system. However, instead of envelopes, my wife threw all those envelopes away and picked up a little coupon organizer that had 13 sections in it. And she labeled those sections for each category of these irregular expenses that we were going to have each month. And then we funded those with cash left over after we paid our regular expenses into the bank. So it cut out, 60% of our bills were set on automatic, so we only had 40% of the cash that we were having to deal with. and it cut the categories in more than half. And so now all of a sudden it's a very easily maintained, handled, and administrative system. And it's the beauty of cash is there are a whole bunch of advantages to it. Dave Ramsey will tell you that if you spend cash, you'll spend about 20% to 30% less money. That's number one. Number two, you always know exactly how much you have to spend in each category with no math or any accounting necessary. Once you put your money in after payday, you have an amount in there that you can look at, and you spend out of that with no tracking, and you can look at it at any time and see how much money you have left for groceries for the month, for example, or how much you have left for gasoline, or how much you have left for entertainment. And so you have a real-time, accurate, up-to-the-minute accurate standing of where you are budget-wise with no bookkeeping or accounting done. And then number three, the secret power of this thing is if you do have to go over on some category, you still have the ability to do so, but the difference is you have to, in real time, make a choice of which other area of your life is that change going to come out of.
So there are a lot of things come to my mind when you describe this, because the envelope system, I used to, before I was a financial advisor, I worked with a nonprofit called Money Management International, but they used to also be called Consumer Credit Counselors Southwest. So we did a lot of budgeting, and so that's where I'm familiar with the envelope system and the cash system. I really like the idea because some of I used that myself, and it was very successful compared to what I did in the past. But there were some limitations to it. It is as you mentioned, it's difficult to pay some of the bills by cash only. I like the idea of really doing that with your bank accounts and assigning the regular expenses. So those are the things that come out monthly or come out that don't really fluctuate. That they're coming out. And then you have the other category, which is irregular. So those are going to be variable expenses like gifts, entertainment, things that may fluctuate, may be different there. And then the idea that when those expenses come out, if you do have to go over, that's possible, but you're going to have to make a real-time decision as to where are you pulling it from, and here's what you have. so
exactly.
you can't really cheat that if it's
right.
an empty.
That's why I wish the federal government would do this, so they couldn't just kick the can down the road to the next generation.
Exactly. If it's an empty pocket, then you're not going to be taking it from there. So very, very good. So I really, really like this because I've seen it work I've seen the envelope system work with many people, and this seems even better because even the things where you've got them set up on auto pay and you're having those expenses come out of that regular account, well, that's hands-free. That's doing a lot of the heavy moving for you, and where the decisions are coming in are in that irregular, and it's really making you aware of those bad habits. So as we're speaking about habits, let me switch and ask you a little bit about that, because you mentioned that earlier. You mentioned that habits, not willpower, is what drives the Pouch Plan. Can you explain that for us?
Absolutely. I mean, you've got the New Year's coming up, and you've got literally millions of people that will be making New Year's resolutions. The majority of them will have to do with exercise and weight loss. And of those people, about 92% of the people will fall off of their exercise programs within the first 6 months. And on the diet, it's even worse. It's about 95%. And that's because they're trying to do it with their willpower. So my question to everybody would be, why use a tool that has a failure rate of 95%? If you will go in and use habits instead of willpower and just put a little tweak in your habits, you can accomplish amazing changes in your life with small changes in your habits. The best example I can give you, and this is really powerful, is the recovery group Alcoholics Anonymous uses this principle when in two areas. One, they give you the habit of a new best friend. This new best friend just happens to be clean and sober, and he's called your sponsor. Then they take the habit of meeting together with your friends and acquaintances where you share life stories and laugh, and they move it from a bar or a tavern to a church basement or a civic center where you still meet with friends and acquaintances and laugh and share life moments. It's just in a better environment. That is one of the strengths of the Pouch Plan. You still spend your money, but you're just doing it a little differently. Let's say, for example, that you saw a $1,000 chair that was on sale for $500, and you said, "I got to have that chair." And the Pouch Plan, you would open up your pouch up, and you would see that you only had $300 in your household expense category. So you have to make the choice right then and there. Which other category of your life are you going to charge the $200 hit to? You're still making the same spending choices. You still got the same habit going. You're just doing it with better friends around.
So that makes a lot of sense. That when you talk about habits versus just I'm going to do, I've got strong willpower, I'm going to make this happen, versus the idea of these habits, these behaviors. And so when we have positive habits going, that's a good thing. But when we have negative habits, that's bad. How do you get rid of a negative habit or a habit that's not helping you?
Well, the easiest way is just do a little tweak in things. Habits basically have three portions to them. They have the cue or the trigger, and then they have your response, and they have what the outcome is. And the outcome is always pleasure for us. That's what we're trying to do. Now, you need to understand something about habits. Your brain loves them. It is your brain's shortcut. It saves energy. It is a function that we have to live on. And if it wasn't for habits, you couldn't do anything else. I mean, you habitually drive your car without thinking about it because you have habits that have taught you how to turn left and how to turn right and how to change lanes. So habits are what your brain is constantly trying to make. So, but if you can tweak one just a little bit, once again, you can get a dynamically different result. There's a great study where Microsoft, at one point, who's famous for having snacks in their office environments, decided people were eating too many M&Ms, but they didn't want to be seen as taking something away, so they just made one change. They took the clear container with the M&Ms in it and changed it to an opaque container. They did this in their New York office that had about 4,000 people in it. Over the next 3 months, those 4,000 people ate 7 million less M&Ms than they did before, just because they couldn't see them.
Wow, that's huge. That's
it's huge.
Very
and
telling.
You can do that same thing. The little tweaks to those habits of spending can make a tremendous difference, especially if you start celebrating them and starting small. Start with $5. Start with $1 a day, of saving, creating that gap. It's so important that you create that gap between what you spend and what you make. That's where your power will come to have your money be working for your future self.
We're bumping towards the end of the show. We've got just a few minutes left here, but I wanted to ask you a couple of things about financial wellness. How does your financial situation impact your health?
Oh, wow. There are hundreds of studies out there that show that there's a correlation between your income and what your health is like. Two of them real quick. I'll run by. One is just the amount of rest and sleep that you get. 68% of the people in a survey in 2016 said they missed at least a night's sleep once a month because of worrying over financial difficulties. Now, let me tell you what that does to you health-wise. If you go 24 hours without sleep, that basically is equal to your brain being at a 0.8% alcohol level.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.